Hi there, welcome to the HR Hub. This is formerly HR Shop Talk. I'm your host, Andrea Adams, and if you want to learn about HR, you've come to the right place. You'll get insight into most aspects of HR through my conversations with HR leaders. You can also find me on YouTube. Today, my guest is Dr. Helen Turnbull CSP. Helen has been working in the DEI space, and she's been doing so long before it became trendy. Unconscious bias is one of her expertises, so I'm really glad to have her here talking about this. Hi, Helen. How are you?
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. So, like I said in the intro there, you have been interested in this long before it became trendy. So, what interested you in DEI?
So, as you can probably pick up pretty quickly from my accent, I'm originally from Scotland. I moved to the United States in 1980. And to be honest, prior to coming here, I hadn't really given any thought to diversity, except that I was aware growing up that there were fundamental differences in the way people were viewed if they were English, Welsh, Irish, or Scots, and that there were ways in which people were judged based on which country we were from. Some of it was good-hearted, but underneath it all, there was still an element of, you're not from England, right? And so I was aware of that. I grew up with religious differences that were fought on the soccer field, for example, that we had a soccer team that was predominantly Protestant, and we had a soccer team that were predominantly Catholic, and that people supported them based on their religious beliefs. So I knew all of that was happening, but I had never, ever looked at the issue of race or the impact of race on different people until I moved to Miami. And I came here in 1980, just after the race riots here. And so that kind of got my attention. And originally, I believed that it was different, that I didn't know anything about it until I had to sit myself down and have a long, hard think about the messages that I got growing up that I had had the privilege as a white person of ignoring. And that was that indeed there are people of color or ethnic minorities in the United Kingdom, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, African, Middle Eastern, Jewish people, Christian people, etc. And that I just was unconscious of it. So when I came to live here, I had the privilege of working at that time for a major corporation that sent me on a training program with the National Training Laboratories. This is a long answer to your question, but it's relevant. And while I was there in Bethel, Maine, with NTL, I began to realize how important the issues of race and gender, sexual orientation, and all of the issues of oppression were. And I came away from there, it was a 1-week experience, I came away from there convinced that that had to be my life's work. Because one of the trainers said, nothing's going to change, Helen, until people in the dominant culture step up and are willing to be advocates and allies. And he doesn't know it, and he's since passed away. But in that moment, I became committed to being an advocate and an ally. And I made that the focal point of my business going forward. So that's how it started.
Can you explain what unconscious bias is? Because that's the focus of our conversation right now. What it is and how it affects the workplace.
So the first thing I would want to say about unconscious bias is, number one, we've all got it. Nobody gets to be a phenomenological exception. Not even me. Not the people that do the work in this space. Not the neuroscientists that are more knowledgeable and talented than I am. And I think that when you use the word trendy, I think unconscious bias has become trendy in recent years. And so lots of people are jumping on the I do unconscious bias training. And yet not everyone knows what unconscious bias really is. But the other thing I would say is that because we've all got it, we all have to do the work that it takes to understand what it is and how it's impacting our decision making. I believe that unconscious bias impacts the quality of your decisions on a daily basis, and that you have to catch it because it kind of lives somewhere at the back of your neck, and you have to move it out to the edge of your shoulder so that you can actually see it in your peripheral vision before you make a decision about people. So, for example, when you're on an interview panel, you're making instant judgments about the candidate as they walk in, or as you go to pick them up in the main lobby of the building. You've already decided if they look like they're a good fit. So what's the mental model that you are carrying about that individual that's coming from your own biases, from your conscious and unconscious bias? You know, they did a research study, I think it was Cook Rocks that published it, where they demonstrated that if they gave a warm cup of tea or coffee to the interview panel, the panelists, while they were interviewing the candidate, the panelists had a more favorable impression of the candidates when they were holding a cup that was warm than if they gave them a glass of iced water in the afternoon. So that the cold drink made them less favorably disposed. So that's how subtle this can be. But unconscious bias lives in all of us. You know, my TEDx talk, I talk about my unconscious bias about airline pilots. When I boarded a flight in the mid-'80s, I think, I noticed as I boarded the flight in Dallas that there was a female pilot, a woman, sitting in the pilot seat. And my stomach turned over, and I thought, there's a woman about to fly this 757 to Fort Lauderdale. And I actually, for a moment, contemplated getting off the last flight from Dallas to Fort Lauderdale that night and waiting till the next day. And I thought, Helen, what are you doing? You're meant to be the diversity expert. Why are you thinking like this? And I realized in that moment that I had an image of a perfect, competent airline pilot. And he was male. He was 6 foot tall. He was white. He had silver gray hair. He looked like he was ex-military. And so he could fly the plane. And I wasn't sure that she could. And so I stayed on the flight that night. And clearly, I'm still here. So she got me safely home, right? But that unconscious bias was so striking to me that I was willing to get off the plane because of it. Now, 15 years later, I was flying on a flight from Canberra, Australia to Sydney on a small commuter flight. And halfway through the flight, a woman's voice came over the intercom and she said, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Qantas. We will be arriving in Sydney in about 20 minutes. It's a beautiful day for flying. Thank you for joining us." And I looked at the flight attendant and I thought, her mouth isn't moving. So it clearly isn't her that's talking. And in that instant, I thought, there's a woman pilot and I forgot to check. Now, I wasn't getting off that plane because we were now at 27,000 feet. But there I have it, 15 years later, that same bias visited me. Now, this time I caught it more quickly. This time I was able to laugh about it. But the fact is, you can't read a book and make your unconscious biases go away. You have to know they're there. You have to catch them. And you have to second guess and question yourself.
Okay, so what are some of the most common forms of unconscious bias at work, and what is their impact?
So I think a couple of them that really always stand out for me is, for example, confirmation bias, is that we don't realize, when you become an expert in your job, you look to confirm the things you already know. When we ask our employees, for example, to think outside of the box, to be more creative, to think differently, what they do is go into the computer programming of their brain and draw out ideas that are already back there that we've used before or we've heard somebody talk about. They're not necessarily new ideas. And so to think outside of the box is a little bit harder work because we're always looking for confirmation bias. We're looking to confirm what makes us comfortable, what we already know, or what the knowledge is that is in my toolkit. And the other part is pattern recognition. We look for patterns. So, you know that expression that in the airport they say, you know, if you see a suspicious situation or he's lying around, then what's the programming, what's the pattern that has you say that person's behaving suspiciously? Patterns that seem familiar to us. And as long as I see the familiar pattern, I'm comfortable. But we also have to be alert to there's something wrong with this picture. And what is it, right? But we're not necessarily conscious of the patterns that are forming, the mental models that we carry in our brain about who's a good fit for your organization and who doesn't fit in. Is it the way they're dressed? Is it the way they carry themselves? Is it their hairstyle? Is it their accent that doesn't work for you? And, I have people who think of themselves as well-intentioned people who are diversity sensitive, but the minute they have to call Comcast or AT&T or one of these companies for service, and they get put through to the Philippines or to India, and they're rude to the person they're talking to, like, put me through to the United States, please. We're not being diversity sensitive. But, our biases are showing up in the tone of voice we use towards people. So you can't call yourself an inclusive and aware individual if you're treating people differently based on their social class, based on the fact that they're not from here, based on the fact that they're not in your team. So, I usually start my keynotes by saying, I know that you believe that you're a well-intentioned individual who always behaves inclusively, but what if you're really not? What if it's actually true that your brain is hardwired for selfishness and similarity and not at all for diversity and inclusion?
How can organizations know if unconscious bias is having a significant impact on their workplace? I think what you're telling me is it is having a significant impact. So how do you know when it's a problem?
Well, a couple of things. So the short answer is yes, it is. It always is. Every one of us is doing it. And so you have to be willing to talk about it. You have to be willing to have conversations to make it okay. I mean, I advocate with the teams that I work with, leadership teams or diversity sessions I'm doing on Zoom, that we make it okay for people to say, hold on, let's not make that decision until we check our biases, until we talk about, are we making a decision based on unconscious patterns? Are we turning this person down for the promotion because they don't fit my pattern? They don't look like me. They don't sound like me. They're a little bit too different. And could that little bit too different be the difference between an exceptional employee who brings something new to the table or getting the same person that you have recruited for years? And so there's no easy answer to this, Andrea. There's no key that unlocks this, because I do not believe unconscious bias goes away. I simply believe you have to raise it to consciousness in order to be willing to have the courage to lean in and say, hold on a minute, let's question that. Now, there are ways you can look around the organization and you can say, we've done diversity training for 10 years. Is it making a difference? And if you've still got very few women in the C-suite and even less people of color at the top of the organization, you might want to conclude that it's not working as much as you thought it was.
Okay, so we can't eliminate unconscious bias altogether. What's the most effective way to reduce it?
Well, I think the most effective way to reduce it is to do unconscious bias training, inclusion work in the workplace. I mean, a lot of my clients are doing excellent work and having conversations about DEI plus B. The work has evolved over the years for me. When I started doing this work way back in the days that I shared with you, how did I get involved in this? The main focus was around race. And I don't know. I sometimes think there's a small group of people hiding in a closet or a basement somewhere who are thinking up what the next trend should be. Whether it's all of a sudden there are cigars stores everywhere. All of a sudden we're all eating avocado toast for breakfast, and all of a sudden we've moved we've moved from talking about race to talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who makes that decision and how does it suddenly happen? But it happens, right? And so my work has evolved from discussing race primarily, talking about the 1980 report on the changes in the workforce, to diversity. DEI was diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then it went to unconscious bias, which became trendy, as you said. And now it's gone to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And when that first happened, I said, so what's the difference? So inclusion is how the organization makes you feel. What work are they doing to demonstrate that they care? And it cannot just be a statement on the website. We have a DEI policy on our website. Good. But how are people feeling in the organization? Belonging is how I feel about being included. So do I feel I belong on the team? Because if I don't feel I belong, I cannot possibly bring my best self to the table. You will get compliance from me, but not commitment. And that's the difference. It is that the work that it takes is people are very smart around knowing whether you're sincere as a leader in wanting to hear their story and in wanting to make sure that your team is inclusive, or you're giving the whole thing lip service. And when you give it lip service, I don't trust you. I'm not about to trust you. I don't believe you. And I'm not letting my guard down. And so the difference is around authenticity and sincerity.
You were talking about unconscious bias training. I have heard from some that, unconscious bias training doesn't work. I think what they've said is it pushes it further underground. What have you found?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll put my biases on the table with this. I think, first of all, it's contextual. For me personally, it depends on how sincere the organization is about the initiatives they're doing around DEIB. So if it's lip service, if it's let's give our employees 1 hour of video on unconscious bias and check the box, it will not work. You're wasting your employees' time, and whatever you've spent on the budget. If it is a little bit more than that, and you're willing to invest in training programs and you're rolling it out, it could be excellent. On the other hand, it still might not work. And it might not work because it's a standalone program that isn't integrated into the way in which you want to change the culture. The clients that I work with are genuinely concerned about making sure it's part of the overall story. Yes, there's a vision statement on their website, but their senior leadership are not saying to HR, go train the employees on this. The senior leadership are stepping up to ask, what kind of training do we need? What do we need to do? And if you're a leader and you roll your eyes as you say to your employee, I have to send you to diversity training this week. The minute you roll your eyes, everything's over, because I know you don't want me to waste my time going to that. So it's a little bit like, I'm not a parent, but parenting your children. If you give them mixed messages, you have to go to your room if you do this. The next time they do that, you don't send them to the room, or they see you doing it, and then you have to say, well, different rules for me, I'm an adult. So if the leaders send mixed messages, it will not work.
Can you reflect on the role of HR in addressing unconscious bias? What do you think they should be doing?
Well, I have a number of reflections on the role of HR. At certain clients, the HR department is the department that drives the diversity training, the unconscious bias training, whereas other clients have a chief diversity officer or a CDO, a Chief Diversity Officer, or a department specializing in that, or it is the remit of the L&D department, leadership and development, in which case HR can be seen as important business partners, or they can be seen quite often as an irritant in the system. Oh, and I'll take that problem to HR. They are, policing the situation. So I think HR gets an unfortunate rap at times that they're not there to help. They're actually there to hinder and keep the rules and regulations in place. My experience has always been I've had great relationships with HR people and with the related departments. I've worked with chief diversity officers. I've worked with HR partners over the years in different countries in the world. And I've also worked with L&D departments whose responsibility is the curriculum. But in every case, the HR business partner is included and involved. And the more I am able to have conversations with these individuals, the better able I am to customize the program. Even when I've done that kind of thing before, which obviously I have, I'm very interested in hearing from people. So one of my clients will sometimes say to me, oh, Helen, we want you to do this race and ethnicity workshop for an intact team. Now, I don't have to do this, but the first thing I say is, then can I speak to the leadership? And can I speak to the HR business partner? And I'll have a Zoom call just to chat to them. Tell me a little bit about the department. Tell me what's going on and tell me what's making you ask for unconscious bias training. Are you asking for DEIB training? And also tell me what success would look like. So what do you want to come out the other end of this with? And I think the HR business partners play an incredibly important role in being the bridge between the leadership and myself in terms of what is the expectation. What about the people side of the business is really, really important.
So if you think about DEI more broadly, which sometimes HR is tasked with championing, I guess, or leading, how important is it to address unconscious bias in those efforts?
I think it's always important. Here's my belief. Because things get trendy and then not trendy, unconscious bias as a topic will go away. But it won't go away in reality, right? And that's the irony of it is, race hasn't gone away as a topic in this country, even though we stopped calling most programs about race. And unconscious bias isn't going to go away. And so I think most HR departments today where the client is doing any kind of DEI work has done that. You see, here's why unconscious bias became trendy, because it's kind of sexy. It's kind of interesting and intriguing, and it tells us a little bit more about our brains that we didn't already know. And the key here is, so we've all got it. So it's not just me. It's not because I'm white. It's not because I'm a man. It's not because I'm heterosexual. You've got it too. And so we can spread the blame, so to speak. If we've all got unconscious bias, then who needs to be responsible for it, right? So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon that, yes, we've all got it, and yes, we should do something about it.
Sometimes people would say, we've all got it, so I don't have to do anything about it. I mean, they've got it too. What is the case for doing something about it?
First of all, it affects the quality of your day-to-day business decisions. And if you want to improve your bottom line, then you should be paying attention to that. Again, when I talk to clients, especially in a keynote, I'll say, if I could give you a 10% improvement in your productivity and your return on investment, would you be interested? And I have never, ever had a leader say, no, I'm not interested, Helen. If you can give me 10% improvement, I'm all yours, right? And my argument is, if I can help you to improve the inclusion metric in your organization, if I can help you to make people feel they belong in your organization, if I can minimize the negative impact of unconscious bias on your team, your department, your business unit, or your organization at large, would you be interested? And they all say yes. But because for me, inclusion is the gap. You know, the Gallup poll every year puts out an engagement survey, and the numbers are not very encouraging. I mean, pretty much for the last 10 years, they've been saying things like only 32% of the employees are engaged at work, fully engaged at work.
Yeah.
That leaves 70+% not engaged at work, right? And that for me is a huge opportunity gap. What would make them feel more engaged? Well, feeling they belong would help. Feeling more included would help. Seeing themselves go up through the organization would help. If I look up and see more women in leadership, I think I could do that too. So inclusion is a much more important business metric than people necessarily understand.
I know we're going to have that discussion about inclusion specifically, so I'm going to leave it here. Well, thanks, Helen. That was so amazing. There was just so much in there. I don't even know what to pull out to reflect on right now. So I'm just going to leave the whole thing with my audience. We have reached the end of this episode. Thanks for listening out there. We'll catch you next time when I talk with another insightful guest.